Today's topic is doing online research. If you've got 5 minutes, I've got 5 tips to help you improve your skills. Doesn't matter whether you're a blogger or you write books, fiction or nonfiction, you write magazine articles, whatever you write, sooner or later you're going to have to do some research. And because it's the 21st century, most of that research is going to be online. I have a question for you. Have you ever wondered about whether or not your online research skills are as good as they could be? See this library? Back when I started my writing career 30 years ago, this is where I did all of my research for my nonfiction books, which is where I began. Books, card catalogs, indices, microfiche, microfilm. Those were the basic tools that I used to do my research. And somewhere along the way, the internet came into vogue and the World Wide Web opened up a whole new world of research. Some of it good, some of it not so good in terms of resources. So I've got 5 tips for you to help you to improve your online research. Tip number 1 is keep track of every website, every URL you visit, and make a note about each one of them. This is something that I transferred from library research to internet research somewhere along the line. And it's based on the best piece of advice that I ever got when I was writing my master's thesis and I was working on the literature review for it. Someone told me, never search for the same source twice. And I never have since then. The truth is, you're not going to use every single piece of research that you find in the piece that you're writing at that particular time, but you might want to use it some other time, and you never want to find yourself saying, I wonder where I saw that piece of information. You want to know that you have a record about it and you can go and find that and use it again. Tip number 2, let your planned, organized research become organic. Let one source lead to another. This is the fun part about doing online research. Actually, it was a fun part about doing research in books and indices as well. As you're reading that source that you've look for what they've sourced. Look at the resources that were used for the creation of that particular piece and move on from there. There was a time when I used books for research a lot, and I would always read the bibliography. And the bibliography, that long list that writer used, would lead me to important pieces of information that I might need for mine. Tip number 3 is ask each research question at least 5 different ways. Now, you know as well as I do that what you put into a search engine like Google is going to dictate what you get out of it. And that means that if you're not asking the right question, you're not going to get the information that you need, or that you not sure you need, but you do need once you see it. Let me give you an example. Let's say you're doing some research on movies from 1965. You could start with the question, what films were released in 1965? And that'll get you certain kinds of information. Then you could ask the question another way. You could say, what were the most popular films in 1965? Different search results. Some overlap, but not the same. You could also ask the question, what were the worst films of 1965? And it's going to give you a whole lot of other perspectives on it. Finally, you could ask the question by saying, who were the big guns in Hollywood in 1965? And that focuses your search very differently. Tip number 4, check your source credibility. This is especially important if you're writing nonfiction because details are really important, but it also can be important in certain kinds of fiction as well, or in memoir if you're trying to look up something to get the exact details or timing about a particular piece of information. At some point in the process, someone is going to check the sources. Now, if, for example, you're looking for treatments for arthritis, you're going to want to check to make sure that you're looking at a credible source for that information and not one of those quack medical sites. Unless, of course, you're writing a novel, for example, and maybe you're looking for some kind of a quack medical treatment for arthritis. In that case, you might want to get some ideas from them, but they don't become sources per se. And what about Wikipedia? I think we have to mention that because oftentimes that will be the very first resource that comes up when you do an online search. Wikipedia is a good place to start reading an article, but remember that anyone can edit Wikipedia entries, and so some of them are going to be slanted and some of them are going to be not quite as accurate as you might hope they are. This was a particular problem when Wikipedia first began, and at the university, for example, we would never let students use Wikipedia as a resource. However, you can move on from Wikipedia if you read that article first and then you look at the kinds of things that you want to research further, you move on from there. You don't, however, use it as your final source. Tip number 5, keep meticulous records and recycle your research. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, first of all, at some point in the future, I'll do another video on how to keep records. But what I'm talking about is that you might be able to reuse some of your research that you've done for some other pieces. You might want to use some of the research that you've done on a magazine article as a source for your novel. You might also get ideas from things that you're looking up on the internet. You might find that one idea leads to another and you suddenly need that information, that background information, so that you can recycle it. And that's the reason for keeping really good records. Well, as it turns out right now, I'm working on a novel that's largely set in the 1920s and 30s, and the internet has been a tremendous source of information for me, so maybe I better get back to that. Maybe you have some research to get back to too. Talk to you next time. Subscribe to Write, Fix, Repeat, and maybe I can help you improve your writing knowledge and skills. 5 tips at a time.